It kills one person every 3 seconds. Sepsis, blood poisoning, bigger killer than cancer, we now determine. That's according to some extraordinary research, which we will investigate on Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Sepsis occurs when the body's natural defence to infection goes wrong, and it is apparently much more widespread than had previously been thought.
It's known as the hidden killer, as it's so difficult to spot. Sepsis is the body's overwhelming and life-threatening response to infection that can lead to tissue damage, organ failure, and death. The symptoms can look like the flu or a chest infection, but there's no one sign, and it's different in adults and children. A new study from researchers in Washington claimed that sepsis is now the most deadly condition in the world, killing 11 million people a year, more than even cancer. In 2017, sepsis was responsible for 1 in 5 deaths around the world. Some experts argue that these figures may be inflated, as they only reflect our heightened awareness, and what might have been previously recorded as pneumonia is now being labelled as sepsis. But others say the trend is worrying. So what can be done to contain the infection?
We are going right around the UK to begin with. To Glasgow first, Colin Graham there, Chief Operating Officer at Sepsis Research. Then we go down to Gravesend in the UK, just off the Thames Estuary. Jessica Tuffield there, World Sepsis Day Ambassador and Advocate for the UK Sepsis Trust. She has a story to tell. With me at the round table, Mervyn Singer, Professor of Intensive Care Medicine at University College London, and Dr. Rob Lambkin-Williams, an independent virologist. Thank you all for coming in. I want this to be an informative show that people at the end of it, they say, actually, I can watch out for this now. I know a little bit more about it. But Jessica, I want to come to you first of all. Twice in 1 year, you got this. And it was life-threatening in both occasions?
I think sepsis in general it's a life-threatening illness. Now, the first time I was extremely lucky, and if it wasn't for my mum, I wouldn't be here today.
And then you got it from a chest infection, right?
That's right, yeah, just a simple chest infection. Now, I've been prone to chest infections my whole life because I have an underlying condition called TRT syndrome. So I was always getting chest infections when I was younger. So for me, having a chest infection, I wouldn't have thought of anything else. But it wasn't until that I rapidly sort of made that decline, very rapidly actually, did we think actually, no, something's severely wrong here.
Okay, Mum called the ambulance for the second time. You were okay. Did it leave you with debilitating conditions for a long period afterwards, even to this day? Because what we're talking about 3.5, 4 years ago.
It's coming up 4 years now. So I'm very, very lucky. And I deem myself as lucky every day because I've got all of my limbs. The one thing that did happen is post-sepsis syndrome. And that is what I think there needs to be more awareness about sepsis because there does. It is a huge issue at the moment. And as you just said, it's a bigger killer than cancer. But also, we need to touch on post-sepsis syndrome because survivors like myself, I wasn't aware of what was going to happen to me after. And I think that's a real issue.
Yes, and you had chronic fatigue syndrome for some time, didn't find it possible to go back to the same old job. We'll hear more from you in a moment about your role as an ambassador, Jessica. But Mervyn, let me ask you, you're head of an ICU, intensive care unit. A lot of the patients in there will have blood poisoning. Obviously, it's going to be worse for them if they have weakened systems, as Jessica has suggested here. But can a perfectly healthy person end up with sepsis?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, the vast majority do have an underlying problem. They're usually elderly, frail. They have either cancer, heart problems, lung problems, etc. And that means they're more susceptible. They're predisposed for the infection to actually trigger a bigger host immune response by the body. But yes, as as Jessica mentioned, perfectly fit, healthy people can also get it. So the numbers are much lower, but still, young, fit, perfectly healthy people just out of the blue can develop a life-threatening illness.
So I'm at home, I've got a bit of a cold, I've got a chest infection. How would I know that it had worsened to the point where Jessica says if a mum hadn't called the ambulance for the second time, she wouldn't be here today?
I think because you'd be in that minority group where things just don't progress like they should do. So huge numbers of people, millions of people get coughs, colds, infections, urinary infections, and the vast majority clear up either spontaneously or maybe a trip to the general practitioner to get an antibiotic. That's the vast, vast, vast majority. A small proportion will, however, carry on getting worse, and they'll develop organ dysfunction, organ failure. So your lungs, your kidneys, your
And that's what kills you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let me go through some of the symptoms as described on a website that I saw this morning, presumably told to the reporter on that website by medical personnel. Slurred speech, extreme shivering or muscle pain, passing no urine in a day, severe breathlessness, high heart rate, skin mottled or discoloured. There could be other reasons for those things as well, couldn't
Absolutely. Yeah. So they're not specific for infection by any means. A severe heart attack can give you many of the same features. However, it's a trigger, a warning that the patient is a lot sicker than a straightforward infection. This is bad infection, which means there's a high chance that the organs aren't working and therefore life-threatening.
I'll come back to you to get your views on whether, in fact, this has been overblown in terms of the reporting, that there's a bit of an unnecessary scare in just a moment. But Rob, you also had sepsis. Your appendix burst. You were with medical people, very luckily, in the United States. How close were you to being in a critical condition?
It's difficult to know because I was flying out to the States. I was at a conference. I was due to be one of the people giving a talk at that conference. And that morning, I actually had breakfast with a couple of my medical colleagues. And they said, you look a little bit tired, a little bit, but I'd just done long flights. I just assumed it was how I was going to be, that sort of thing. And it progressed extremely rapidly. So that I asked one of my other colleagues to actually take over and do my lecture later that day.
Did you have peritonitis where the appendix ruptures?
My appendix at that point was grumbling. And I'd been given all clear to actually fly up there.
Yeah.
And what happened was it did blow, basically.
Okay, and you got an infection because of that.
But because my colleagues saw me deteriorate so quickly, and I happened to be lucky enough to be at a conference with scientists and medics.
Jessica, I saw you sort of nodding in or shaking your head in disagreement with what I suggested about it. Perhaps it was overblown. I will come to you on that one, but I want to bring Colin in so that everybody's had a chance to talk at the beginning of the programme. Why do you think it's now getting the attention that it is?
I think because sepsis has now been coded as sepsis. It's really important that other illnesses may have been diagnosed and they were coded as something different. And I think that's why we're seeing this big spike in the number of cases. And people are actually recognising it's sepsis now rather than something else that it may have been coded as previously.
Okay, Mervyn, I want to ask you about your thoughts on the reporting of this and whether, in fact, we're getting a bit worried. Jessica, you will then have a chance to come back because I saw you looking a little bit unhappy when I made that suggestion. But is it, I mean, almost as Colin says, that we now recognise so many different things as perhaps being blood poisoning, stroke, sepsis, the same thing, whereas, in fact, they used to be scattered around lots of different thought departments, that it hasn't actually increased, we just know more about it?
I think I completely agree with what Colin's saying. It's pneumonia, when it's severe enough to cause respiratory failure, that becomes sepsis. But formerly it was called pneumonia, now it would be called sepsis. So there is a large degree of what Colin's saying in terms of greater awareness. I think also, unfortunately, there's financial incentives. So hospitals can charge more if they code a patient as being septic rather than having a pneumonia. So in the UK, it's up to 40%.
Well, you're suggesting there's some kind of manipulation?
Yes. And in the United States, it can be up to threefold higher reimbursement. So there is a financial incentive also for hospitals to code.
Is somebody
sepsis
onto this?
Oh, it's well recognised.
then why isn't it being stopped?
Well, there are lots of discussions going on to try and to actually improve upon the situation.
And can I just ask you this one? The fact that it covers so many different conditions, is that one of the reasons why it's so difficult to spot and diagnose?
Well, it's a syndrome. It's not a condition per se. So it's an umbrella syndrome that encompasses chest infections, urinary infections in children, middle-aged people, elderly patients. And so there's a protean sort of list of manifestations. And so it's an umbrella system that just lumps all of these infections that trigger this abnormal host response, causing organ dysfunction into one entity.
Let's ask Jessica about that, and Rob, I'll come back to you in just a moment. Are you agitated by this? Do you think some people are playing the system, or do you think...
No, I personally think that since the Lancet report, that we have seen a lot more in the press, and it is about time that we did, because I'm a normal girl, normal person. I'm not in the industry. I'm just a survivor of it. And what I have found is it is the survivors' stories that people are waking up and listening to. So the more stories there are that do come out about whether it was caused by flu or a common cold, it's making people listen. So I don't think it can be blown out of proportion, because I think the more that it is in the press, the more people are going to wake up, listen, and know the signs and know the symptoms and be more aware.
Yeah, but can I just say this, and any of you eminent people can come in on it as well. The problem with that is that if everybody becomes Dr. Google and goes through all of the things that I've just mentioned, then the health service would be overloaded. How do you advise people to recognise that they have something this serious when the onset of it is so rapid and can be so damaging? If they leave it and wait to see if it's going to get worse, that could be worse for them. On the other hand, they could be reacting too quickly.
I completely understand, because it is so hard, isn't it? You know, it's one of, as you guys were saying, it's one of those that you can't just think, oh, okay, it is sepsis. But what I personally did is I felt so unwell, and I thought that I didn't think that I was going to survive, you know. And the UK Sepsis Trust, they just simply asked, could it be sepsis? You know, the 111 system is fantastic. And that is who my mum contacted, and they were brilliant with me. And I think you know your own body. So if you feel like something isn't right, or just go, all you need to do is just get it checked out. Ring 111 and say, I'm feeling this way. Is this normal? Or, you know, I've got a high temperature and things like that. But I think it does come down to, yes, the signs and the symptoms are so similar to other illnesses, but it's knowing when it's getting too much.
Okay, and I just wanted to throw this one at Colin. Do you recognise the dangers that I'm pointing out here?
Yes, we understand that it's about the speed of these symptoms. So with the low and high temperature, the uncontrolled shivering, the not passing as much urine as usual, the cold and blotchy hands and feet, these things, if they rapidly progress, and it's about speed here, that's when we need to get you into hospital. Because if we can get you into hospital, get antibiotics into you, fluids and oxygen, your chances of survival increase dramatically if we can do that within the first hour. So it's really important that health professionals understand what to look out for and to take action as quickly as possible. The public have to be aware of the symptoms to look out for. That is why awareness is really important. So people need to know about the symptoms that we're actually looking at, but then to know when to make that judgment call when their temperature has gone through the roof, gone very quickly, very high or very low over a short period of time, or they're feeling confused, or delirium is kicking in and they're not making any sense, or the uncontrolled shivering kicks in. And we're talking about not just shivering, we're talking almost like the rickets, where you're shaking off your bed.
The ague, as it used to be called. Yeah.
That is something that people should understand, and that's when they have to make that emergency call and get to hospital and get healthcare specialist help as soon as possible.
Rob, you wanted to say something. I've got a question in a minute, but it's a medical one. You can either...
I wanted to emphasise I was in an extremely lucky position when it happened to me, because I was surrounded by medics and other people, and they recognised it quickly. It's very difficult for an individual to actually realise what's going on at that point. I actually went back to my hotel room because I thought, I'm just tired. It's been a long flight. I'm just not feeling well. I went back to my hotel room. Fortunately, my colleagues who were with me at the time, they saw me go downhill very, very quickly.
You're a virologist as well, so let me ask you what, well, I hope it's not a silly question. In fact, I don't think any questions are silly. You can get this through various means. It could be a virus, it could be bacteria, it could be a cut, it could be...
It's usually bacterial, but it can be viral infections as well.
And is there a difference?
The outcomes... No, and maybe you comments on that more, but no, not really. If you go septic, you go septic, and your body overloads, and it literally crashes.
Well, septic comes from I think it's the Greek word for rotten.
So, and your body crashes basically. Your comment: as soon as you can get antibiotics, although they wouldn't work for viruses, obviously, but if it's a bacterial infection, the quicker you can get the antibiotics into people, the better.
And of course, this was one of the questions. I've got two questions here. One, is there anything you can do to avoid it? Because the majority of these problems are in the less developed world. Hygiene may come into that. And secondly, what about, and we hear this all the time, antibiotic resistance?
I think antibiotics are important, but they're not a panacea. That's an important point to stress.
Well, one would hope they weren't a panacea because they're supposed to be effective.
But in terms of just getting the antibiotic will save your life. So, and again, the evidence now, there's lots and lots of evidence coming through that every hour doesn't count. So clearly, the analogy I make is if someone's bleeding to death, you're going to need to give them an uncross-matched blood transfusion because they're bleeding to death in front of you. But if somebody's a bit anemic, but otherwise not that bad, then you've got time to send the blood to the laboratory and get a proper cross-match. That's for somebody who's bleeding.
I know, but in the case of sepsis...
So for sepsis, the vast majority don't get to the stage that Colin's rightly mentioning, where you've, become very drowsy, rigor, shaking, etc. So those are a relative minority. So absolutely, you should jump on them quickly, but those are a minority. The majority don't present like that. It's a much more indolent form, and so it's not a case of rush and give an antibiotic.
So worry, but don't worry unnecessarily. Exactly. And Colin, you want to get more awareness out there, and Jess, I'll come to you after that. You want to get... Are people listening to you?
We believe so, because the Scottish Government ran a campaign. And the first campaign was to find out that people actually understood the word sepsis, first of all. And the last campaign, they said 90% of the population in Scotland had actually heard of the word sepsis. That doesn't mean they understand the symptoms, and that's slightly different. So the next campaign that's going to be running in April this year will look at the symptoms, and hopefully you'll know the symptoms, know what to look out for, and these could actually save your life. But it's not just about awareness. It's also about research as well into sepsis. And sepsis research is teamed up with Edinburgh University at the Rosalind Institute to look at what genes play in actually getting sepsis, and why some people survive sepsis and other people die from sepsis. And that's really important. That research is vital. And the Rosalind Institute under Dr. Kenny Bailey is going to be the largest study across the UK, looking at samples from people who have had sepsis, and then we can take the DNA from them and explore
and work out who's more liable to get it than others.
That's exactly right.
Jessica, what do you do as a World Sepsis Ambassador?
I was obviously offered it because I've done a lot of campaigning. I'm obviously Miss Gravesham. I was a part of the Miss England pageant as well. And I use my platform to raise awareness about sepsis. I have my own campaign called Around the World in 13 Days, and it had a 50,000 viewer reach. I had people from all around the world get involved.
Well, what's the one message you try to get across then?
That it's... I like to think as my platform is just a way to amplify the voices of others. So for example, everyone that is involved in my campaign, it's their story, it's their image. And obviously on my blog site, I've got a dedication page where they write a letter, whether it's to someone that they've lost or to someone to say thank you. I had a lady from Australia who sent me a letter, and she dedicated it to all of the medical staff that saved her life. So my role is basically to help people raise their awareness themselves.
Okay, Mervyn, let me come to you. We've only got a few more minutes left. And I made a note of two things here, and they may be related, they may not. One is this is from the National Institute of Health, big American, very well-respected medical research centre. The last 2 to 3 years provided several, quote, big steps regarding our understanding and management of sepsis. Your thoughts on that come a long way. And then this was another one, slightly offbeat, that I saw. Imperial College, which is London, scientists create AI system, artificial intelligence system, to help treat sepsis. Do you know about both of these?
Yes. It's a work in progress. You know, we're a long...
So no big steps yet?
No big step. Much as I'd love to say yes, and it emphasises Colin's point, we're learning more, we're getting better, but there's still a huge way to go in understanding fully the mechanisms and early diagnostics. These things are coming. There will be soon, and they're already beginning to come through point-of-care devices. So at the bedside, you don't need to wait days for a lab to tell you. For viruses, bacteria, fungi, things that can cause sepsis will be available. There are technologies coming through that will allow an infected patient to be diagnosed as saying, you're going to become clinically unwell tomorrow. Those things are coming through.
And is that the AI side of things?
No, the AI thing is more when a patient's ill. Well, again, there are many AI type of initiatives going on, and this is one which was basically looking back at a retrospective database, and they showed that they could predict perhaps the way to give fluid.
The sort of thing that we were referring to earlier about these tests at Colin.
Well, no, not really. That's more management rather than diagnosis. So I think Colin's arguing, I think rightly, that we need diagnostics to actually say, yes, this patient has an infection.
Are we getting to the stage where a simple blood test could tell a clinician, and the blood test that's run through an algorithmic system, artificial intelligence, could say almost instantly?
You don't even need the AI system. The tests are coming which will do that.
Yeah, well, tell us.
No, I was going to agree with you, and I wanted to support what you were saying as well, that obviously it's down to the individual, but it's actually also down to the physicians, and when people end up in hospital, to actually rapidly understand this person actually is seriously ill. They are likely to have sepsis. And the speed at which that diagnosis is made when people get into hospital, that's actually critical.
And so is it quite possible that very soon we could have a system whereby a skin prick blood test, as you go into accident and emergency, could immediately alert the physicians to the fact that there is a serious problem here?
I think we're getting very close to that. I think we've got flow charts and that procedures that could be improved.
Well, quick thought then from Colin, and then going to end with you, Jessica. That's fantastic news, isn't it?
We're at the early stages of the research, so it's going to take time for us to do these tests and run through all what we're actually looking for. So, but it is exciting that we've got the largest project happening in Scotland that's got hospitals from all over the world and the UK taking part, sending samples in to the Roslin Institute, so we can actually look at the DNA and sample these tests. And fingers crossed, over a number of years, we'll be able to run these diagnostics. And fingers crossed, we'll then be able to have better treatment drugs that can treat sepsis with the aim of trying to eradicate this.
And of course, it'll have to be a whole host of different types of drugs because there are a whole host of different conditions. Jessica, let's round this off with you. You look fantastically healthy. Tell us how your life has changed because of this, if it has.
Yeah, no, it has. So I originally worked in the hospitality trade. I was working very long hours. And once I went back to work after having sepsis, I couldn't do it anymore. I was just always exhausted. And you say I look well, it's a lot of makeup. I constantly have bags. I constantly look tired. and I am always tired, and it's something that I've had to adjust to. My day-to-day routines had to change. I had to change my job, and it's just I find that I'm lucky that my life didn't change so dramatically. You know, there's people out there that have had to adjust a hell of a lot more. I'm talking how to walk, how to use wheelchairs, and I just think there needs to be a lot more support out there for them.
Thank you so much. You talk about how much makeup you've got on. You should see how long it took them to get me ready to sit in this chair. Jessica, thank you. Colin, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to both of you for coming on the programme. From me, David Foster from the Roundtable team, we hope to have your company next time. I hope you've learned something from this, that it hasn't scared you half to death, but I suppose being aware of what is out there and knowing what to do if it comes your way is half the battle. We'll see you next time. Goodbye for now.